The kidnapping. A father's despair. It was an ordinary morning when John's world turned upside down. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a warm orange glow over the small town. Birds chirped outside the window, and the faint sound of cars passing by filled the air. John was in the kitchen, sipping his coffee as he prepared breakfast. His daughter, Emily, was still in bed, her alarm clock blinking 7:00 a.m. on her nightstand. He smiled softly, thinking about the busy day ahead. It was a normal day, just like any other. Or so he thought. John didn't hear the footsteps at first. The house was quiet, too quiet. Then a loud crash echoed from the living room, followed by frantic voices. His heart skipped a beat. Before he could even react, the door to the kitchen burst open. The sight that met John's eyes felt like a nightmare. Two masked men, armed with guns, rushed into the room. One of them was holding Emily by the wrist, her face pale with fear. She struggled, her eyes wide with terror, but the man's grip was too strong. "Let her go," John shouted, his heart racing as he stood up, instinctively moving toward them. The second man, tall and menacing, pointed his weapon at John, his voice cold. "Stay where you are. Don't move, or we'll hurt her." John froze. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to do something, but he was paralyzed by the situation. His daughter, his little girl, was in the hands of these strangers. His thoughts were racing, trying to process what was happening. Why were they here? What did they want with Emily? Emily looked up at her father, her eyes filled with tears. "Daddy, help me." John's heart shattered. He could feel his body shaking as the fear and desperation crept in. His mind screamed for him to act, but his body refused to move. The armed men weren't just threatening his daughter, they were taking her. And if he did anything wrong, it could be the end. "We're not here to hurt you, old man," the man holding Emily said with a sinister grin. "But if you try to stop us, things are going to get messy." John's eyes darted from one man to the other. He had to do something. He had to act. But he couldn't risk losing his daughter. The man with the gun stepped closer to Emily, pushing her toward the door. "Move now," he ordered. Without thinking, John rushed forward, his hand reaching for the gunman. His mind screamed at him to stop, but his body reacted instinctively. He couldn't let them take Emily, not without a fight. "Dad, no," Emily cried out as John's hand grazed the man's arm. But it was too late. The gunman turned swiftly, pushing John back with a force that sent him crashing into the kitchen counter. His head slammed against the edge of the counter, and for a moment, everything went black. The last thing he heard was the sound of the door slamming shut and his daughter's distant screams. John struggled to stand, pain shooting through his skull. His hands trembled as he touched the cold surface of the counter, his mind racing. Emily was gone. They had taken her. The house was eerily quiet now, but it was a silence filled with dread. He staggered to the door, opening it to the sight of his front yard. Empty. The car that the kidnappers had used was already speeding away, tires screeching as it disappeared down the road. John's breath caught in his throat as the reality of the situation set in. They were gone. His daughter, his only child, had been taken, and he had no idea where they had gone or why. Panic gripped him. He should call the police. He should have done something, but his mind was clouded with confusion. How could he have let this happen? What could he have done to stop them? John ran to his phone, dialing the police. His hands were shaking as he spoke to the operator. "My daughter. They took my daughter. Please, you have to help me." The operator's voice was calm, but it only made John's panic grow. "Sir, we need you to stay calm. Can you provide a description of the vehicle?" John gave the operator the details, but he couldn't stop shaking. His mind kept replaying the moment they took Emily, the look of terror in her eyes as they dragged her away. The thought of her in their hands made him feel powerless. He had failed her. "Sir, we're sending a unit to your location. Please wait for the authorities to arrive," the operator said, her voice soothing but distant. John hung up the phone without responding. He couldn't wait. Not anymore. His daughter's life was in danger, and he wasn't going to sit idly by while she was out there, alone with these kidnappers. He had to find her. But where would he start? Who could he trust? The police would be slow, and even if they found the kidnappers, would they be able to stop them in time? John's mind was racing, but one thought kept coming back to him. The relic. Months ago, while working in his basement, John had come across something strange. An old, worn-out piece of metal that he'd dismissed as junk. But now, it was the only thing that might hold the key to finding Emily. A memory flashed through his mind. The strange markings on the metal, the symbols that seemed to glow faintly when touched. With new determination, John grabbed the relic. He didn't know how it would help, but it was his only lead. He wasn't about to wait for the police to catch up. He would find Emily. He would save her. He stepped out of the house, the cold air biting at his skin, and set off down the street. He had no idea where this path would lead him, but he couldn't waste any more time. His daughter needed him, and he would stop at nothing to bring her home. The map, a clue to the lost planet. John's heart was still racing from the shocking event. The kidnappers had vanished with Emily, and his mind was clouded with confusion and fear. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. The police were working on the case, but John knew he couldn't wait for them. They were his daughter's only chance, and time was slipping through his fingers. After his brief conversation with the authorities, John returned to his home's basement, still holding the mysterious relic in his hand. His mind kept returning to it. The strange, glowing markings on the metal, the symbols that made no sense to him. Could it be that this seemingly random object had more significance than he had first thought? Was there a connection between this relic and his daughter's kidnappers? John sat down at his workbench, staring at the relic, deep in thought. The metal surface glowed faintly in the dim light of the basement, casting eerie shadows on the walls. His fingers traced the markings, trying to make sense of them. What if this relic wasn't just some random artifact? What if it was a map, a clue to where Emily was? His pulse quickened as he had an idea. He rushed to his old, dusty library shelf and pulled out a stack of books on ancient civilizations and lost technologies. He had never been interested in these things before, but now, with the relic in his hands, he felt desperate to understand its origins. For hours, John pored through the books, matching the symbols on the relic with similar designs from ancient cultures. He found references to hidden worlds, lost planets, and technologies far beyond anything humanity had ever seen. There were legends of an ancient race, long forgotten, that had the ability to travel to distant galaxies. This wasn't just a map. It was a guide to a place no one had seen in millennia. John's hands shook as he realized what he had found. This relic was no ordinary object. It was part of a larger mystery, a clue to a lost planet that no one had set foot on in thousands of years. And somehow, the kidnappers must have known about it. They had taken Emily, not just to hide her, but to bring her to this hidden world. But why? What was so important about this planet? And why had the kidnappers been willing to risk everything to take Emily? The questions swirled in his mind as he examined the map further. The symbols, when arranged correctly, formed a clear path. John's eyes widened as he realized the map led to a distant, forgotten planet, one that had been lost to history. The ancient legends spoke of a powerful civilization that once lived there. But the stories ended in darkness, with no one knowing what had happened to the people of that planet. Had they discovered something so powerful that it became their downfall? As John stared at the map, his determination grew. He had no time to waste. The kidnappers had taken Emily to this mysterious place, and if he was going to save her, he had to follow the trail. There was no turning back now. John knew he had to find out more. The map was his only lead. But how could he even begin to understand where this planet was? The vastness of space seemed endless, and this planet was a shadow in the records of time. The coordinates on the map were vague, but there was no mistaking the path. He had to find a way to navigate it. John knew one person who might be able to help, a former space explorer, a man named Simon. Simon had spent years traveling the stars, charting the unknown and discovering planets lost to the universe. He had knowledge that could help John understand the map and guide him toward his daughter. But reaching Simon would be a challenge. John had lost contact with him years ago. Simon had disappeared off the grid after a failed mission, leaving only rumors of where he might be. But John had no other choice. He had to find him. Without wasting any more time, John packed a bag, grabbed the relic, and set off. He wasn't sure where to start looking for Simon, but he would go to the ends of the earth if he had to. Emily was depending on him. Hours later, John found himself standing at the edge of the city, staring at the old spaceport. The place was a shadow of its former self, filled with rusted ships and abandoned technology. He remembered coming here with his daughter years ago, looking at the stars and dreaming of faraway places. Now the spaceport felt empty, like a place lost in time. John walked toward one of the hangars in the distance. The old metal doors creaked as he pushed them open. Inside, he found what he was looking for, a relic from the past, a ship that Simon had once used for his explorations. It was old, battered, and long since forgotten, but it still held the promise of adventure and a way to track down his daughter. The ship's control panel flickered to life as John stepped inside. The familiar hum of the engines made his heart race. He had no idea how to pilot it, but he would figure it out. He had no other option. He wasn't leaving without Emily. Before he could start the engines, a familiar voice echoed from the shadows. "Looking for something, John." John spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon he didn't have. But the figure that emerged wasn't an enemy. It was Simon, older but unmistakably the same man who had once been his mentor in the world of space exploration. "You found the map, didn't you?" Simon said, his eyes scanning the relic in John's hand. "I knew it would lead you here. I can help you, but you need to be ready for what's out there. The path you're about to take, it's not just a rescue mission. It's something far bigger than that. The journey into the unknown." With the flicker of the ship's engines and the deep hum of the thrusters, John felt a rush of determination fill his chest. He was finally doing it. He was leaving Earth, embarking on the unknown, all for the sake of his daughter. Emily's life was in danger, and every minute he spent on this planet was a minute lost. Simon had taken a seat at the controls of the old spacecraft, his hands moving effortlessly over the outdated buttons and levers. John, still trying to process everything that had happened, stood behind him, clutching the ancient relic that had led them here. The symbols etched into its surface were now more than just strange markings. They were a lifeline. And Simon, with his experience in space, was the key to unlocking its secrets. "You've got a good eye, John," Simon said, glancing back at him. "Not many would recognize what you found. This isn't just a relic. It's a key to a lost world. But that doesn't mean it's going to be easy to get there. This place, it's off the charts. No one has dared to venture there in centuries." John swallowed hard. The weight of Simon's words hit him like a physical blow. He had known the mission was dangerous, but hearing it from Simon made it feel all the more real. There was no turning back. If they failed, Emily could be lost forever. But if they succeeded, it could change everything. "What exactly are we dealing with here, Simon?" John asked, his voice tight with anxiety. "What's so dangerous about this planet? Why would the kidnappers take Emily there?" Simon's eyes darkened as he inputted coordinates into the ship's control panel. "The planet is called Zoritha, lost to time. It was once home to a powerful civilization, one that developed technologies far beyond what we can imagine. But something went horribly wrong. The stories say the planet fell into darkness, and those who survived the cataclysm hid away in secret. They left behind relics, powerful relics, and now it seems someone's gone looking for them." John's heart raced at Simon's words. A lost world, powerful relics, and now his daughter caught in the middle of it all. So you're telling me this isn't just about saving Emily. It's about something much bigger. Simon nodded slowly. Yes, but you need to understand. This is bigger than either of us. These relics could hold the power to change the universe itself. And if someone has taken your daughter to that planet, it's because they believe she has a part to play in all of this. John clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. He wasn't going to let them use his daughter for their twisted plans. No matter what it took, he would find her. And he would protect her. Prepare yourself, John, Simon said as he pushed the final lever, sending the ship into a burst of speed. We're entering deep space now. There's no telling what we'll face once we reach Zoritha. The ship shuddered as it jumped through the stars, the vastness of the universe stretching out before them. John could only stare out the viewports, the dark expanse of space surrounding them. He couldn't help but wonder what awaited them on Zoritha. Was Emily still alive? What dangers lurked on that forsaken planet? As the ship hurtled forward, John's thoughts raced. The relic, the map, kept him grounded. It was the only thing guiding them, the only thing that had a chance of saving Emily. He glanced down at it once again, the symbols shimmering faintly in the dim light of the ship. The more he studied them, the more he realized that this wasn't just a map to a lost planet. It was a map to something far greater, something ancient and powerful that could change everything. I know this looks crazy, but we're closer to Zoritha than you think, Simon said suddenly, breaking the silence. When we get there, it's going to be different. The planet's energy field messes with all our equipment. It's unpredictable, dangerous, and if we don't land carefully, we could be stuck in the atmosphere forever. John nodded, his mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. The truth was, he didn't care about any of that. His mind was focused entirely on Emily. Every second that ticked by was another second closer to losing her. They had to make it to Zoritha, and they had to find her. The ship continued its journey through the cold void of space. Time seemed to stretch on forever, but soon, a faint glow appeared in the distance, just a speck of light against the endless black. As they drew closer, the speck grew larger, revealing the planet they had been searching for, the mysterious, forgotten world of Zoritha. John's heart pounded as the ship came into view of the planet. It wasn't like anything he had ever seen before. The planet was surrounded by a dark, swirling atmosphere that seemed almost alive, full of violent energy. The surface was covered in strange, jagged mountains and deep craters. There was no sign of life, no sign of civilization, just desolation. Simon's voice cut through the silence. We're approaching the landing zone. Brace yourself, John. It's going to be a rough landing. John gripped the seat tightly, his body tense. He didn't care about the rough landing. He cared about one thing, and one thing only, getting to Emily. As the ship descended toward the surface of Zoritha, the energy from the planet's atmosphere began to interfere with the ship's systems. Warning lights flashed on the control panel, and the ship lurched as it was pulled off course. The ground grew closer and closer, and John could feel his heart pounding in his chest. With a violent shake, the ship crashed onto the surface of Zoritha, sending John and Simon tumbling. The ship's systems went dark, and for a moment, everything was silent. John was the first to recover. He unstrapped himself from his seat, his body aching from the crash. His eyes darted toward the exit, the dust-filled air filling the cabin as the door slid open. They were on Zoritha. The journey had brought them here, but the real danger was just beginning. The hunt. Echoes of the past. The air on Zoritha was thick with the scent of ancient dust and a strange metallic taste that lingered in John's mouth. The sky above them was a deep shade of purple, almost black, with swirling clouds of dark energy that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly glow. It was as if the planet itself was alive, breathing in rhythm with the chaos that surrounded them. The land stretched out before them, empty and desolate, a stark contrast to the bustling cities and familiar surroundings John had known back home. John's heart was racing. The planet felt wrong, alien in every sense of the word. The gravity was slightly heavier than Earth's, making each step feel laborious. Every footfall seemed to echo in the silence, amplifying the tension that hung in the air. As he looked around, he saw nothing. No sign of life, no structures or signs of any civilization. It was as if the planet had been abandoned, left to crumble into nothing. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. "We need to keep moving." Simon's voice broke through John's thoughts, his tone grim. "The longer we stay here, the more we're exposed to the planet's atmosphere. Trust me, we don't want to get stuck here after dark." John nodded, not needing any further explanation. He didn't care about the planet's dangers. He cared about Emily. He had to find her. She was somewhere on this forsaken world, and he wasn't leaving without her. He couldn't afford to. Every second spent searching was another moment she could slip further away. They moved cautiously, scanning the terrain for any sign of life. The ground beneath their feet was rocky and uneven, covered in jagged formations that rose from the earth like teeth in the dark. There were no trees, no grass, nothing to break the monotony of the barren landscape. The air felt colder now, like the planet was sucking the warmth from their bodies. John's mind raced as they walked. How had the kidnappers known about Zoritha? What was so important about this planet? Why had they chosen it as a hiding place for Emily? Was there a connection between the ancient relic and this forsaken world? He couldn't afford to overthink it now. He needed to focus. The ground beneath their feet began to shake lightly, and the rumble of distant explosions echoed across the land. John froze, his instincts screaming at him to be alert. Something was happening. Something big. He turned to Simon, who was already scanning the horizon, his expression tense. "I've seen this before," Simon muttered under his breath. "The planet's energy is unstable. It's waking up." John's eyes widened. "What do you mean, waking up?" Simon's face darkened as he spoke. "The relic you found. It's not just a map. It's a key. Zoritha is a planet of incredible power, but that power is dormant. As long as the relic remains intact, the planet stays quiet. But if it's activated, the planet starts reacting. And when it does, things get dangerous." A chill ran down John's spine. What happens when it wakes up? Simon didn't answer immediately. Instead, he motioned for John to follow him as they began walking at a faster pace. "You don't want to know. Let's just say that the ancient civilization that once lived here didn't just disappear. They left behind powerful weapons, ones that could level entire star systems. And if someone finds those weapons, well, the galaxy might never be the same." John's mind raced with the implications of Simon's words. Not only was he hunting for his daughter, but now they were in the middle of a galactic treasure hunt, one that could change the balance of power in the universe. The relic wasn't just a map. It was a key to a devastating power, a power that, if it fell into the wrong hands, could destroy everything. Ahead of them, the ground began to tremble more violently, and the low hum of something massive seemed to reverberate through the air. John could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Something was coming. Suddenly, a blinding light pierced the horizon, followed by the roar of an enormous mechanical beast emerging from the ground. Its massive form rose from the earth, a towering creature of metal and ancient technology. Its eyes glowed with an eerie blue light, and its body moved with an unnatural grace, as if it were an extension of the planet itself. John's breath caught in his throat. "What the hell is that?" Simon's eyes widened. "I was afraid of this. It's a guardian, a protector of the ancient technology. They were designed to keep the relics from falling into the wrong hands." The guardian's head turned slowly toward them, its glowing eyes locking onto John and Simon. It let out a mechanical growl, and John could feel the ground beneath him vibrate with its every movement. The guardian was awake, and it wasn't happy to see them. "We need to get out of here," Simon said urgently, pulling John toward a narrow ravine nearby. "The guardian won't stop until it's either destroyed or we leave the planet. and were not equipped to fight something like that. John's mind raced as they ran. The Guardian was a powerful force, and the relic had somehow activated it. The planet was coming alive, and so were its ancient defenders. He could hear the mechanical beast closing in, its steps getting louder with every passing second. They ducked into the ravine, the walls closing in on them as they hurried deeper into the canyon. John's heart raced, his thoughts consumed with one thing: Emily. "Where is she, Simon?" John asked, panting for breath. "We need to find her. What if she's close?" Simon's face darkened. "I don't know, John. This place, it's a labyrinth, and we're running out of time." As they moved through the ravine, John could feel the presence of the Guardian behind them. The air was thick with tension, and the sound of the Guardian's footsteps echoed off the canyon walls. It wasn't giving up, it was hunting them. They had to find Emily, and they had to find her fast. But as the deep rumble of the Guardian's pursuit grew louder, John couldn't shake the feeling that they were being led into a trap, one that had been set long before they had even arrived on Zoritha. The ancient temple, secrets of the forgotten world. John's heart was pounding, and his breath was heavy as he sprinted through the narrow ravine, his boots kicking up dust with every step. The thudding footsteps of the Guardian were growing louder, and the rumbling sound of its massive form reverberated through the canyon walls. It was only a matter of time before the mechanical monster caught up to them. Simon moved ahead, his eyes scanning the rocky terrain. John had no idea how much longer they could keep running. They needed to find a way to stop the Guardian, or at least outsmart it long enough to keep moving forward. And more than anything, they needed to find Emily. "Look!" Simon shouted suddenly, pointing to a jagged cliffside ahead. John squinted against the harsh light, and there, partially hidden behind a waterfall of rock and debris, was a massive stone structure. It looked like an ancient temple. The towering stone columns and intricate carvings on the walls stood in stark contrast to the barren landscape that surrounded it. The temple seemed almost alive, as if it had been waiting for them to find it. "The temple," Simon whispered, awe creeping into his voice. "It's one of the hidden structures of Zoritha. It's where the most powerful relics were kept." John didn't need to be told twice. With a surge of adrenaline, he pushed forward, racing toward the entrance of the temple. The Guardian's footsteps were growing louder still, but John could feel that the ancient stone structure held the key to their survival. It was their only chance. They reached the entrance just as the ground beneath them shook violently. The Guardian's shadow loomed over them, and John could feel its presence even through the thick walls of the temple. Simon pulled open the massive stone door with a grunt, revealing the darkness beyond. John didn't hesitate. He rushed in, grabbing Simon by the arm and pulling him inside. The door slammed shut behind them with an earth-shattering sound, sealing them in the dark, cool interior of the temple. For a moment, the only sound was their heavy breathing and the distant growl of the Guardian outside. But then, the silence was broken. A soft hum vibrated through the walls of the temple, a sound so low and constant that it seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. The temple felt alive, as if it were somehow aware of their presence. John's eyes adjusted to the dim light, and he saw that the interior of the temple was far grander than anything he could have imagined. Tall stone pillars stretched up to the high vaulted ceiling, and the floor was covered in a strange shimmering substance that gave the entire space an ethereal glow. Carvings and symbols adorned every surface, their meanings lost to time. But John didn't need to understand them. He felt something else, an energy in the air, something ancient and powerful, something that felt connected to the relic they had brought with them. Simon stepped forward, his eyes wide as he surveyed the room. "This is it, the heart of Zoritha." John's eyes followed Simon's gaze. At the center of the temple, in the middle of a vast circular chamber, stood a massive stone pedestal. It was surrounded by glowing symbols and strange alien technology. But the most important thing was what was resting atop the pedestal. A glowing crystal, pulsing with energy, sat in the center, surrounded by an aura of power. "That's what they're after," Simon muttered, his voice a mix of awe and fear. That crystal. It's the key to unlocking Zoritha's power. Whoever controls it controls the planet's energy. John stepped forward, his eyes locked on the glowing crystal. It seemed to call to him, a silent plea that he couldn't ignore. But before he could take another step, a voice echoed through the temple, sending a chill down his spine. "You shouldn't be here." John spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon at his side. But there was no one there, only shadows and strange whispers. The voice had come from nowhere, but it was unmistakable. "I said, you shouldn't be here," the voice repeated, this time more forceful. John's gaze darted around the chamber, but still, he saw no one. "Who's there?" John demanded, his voice steady despite the rising panic. The voice grew louder, its tone now menacing, filled with an unnatural authority. "You seek the crystal, but you do not understand. It is not for you. It never was. Your kind has no place here." John's pulse quickened. This wasn't just some ancient relic. It was a trap, a test, something far more dangerous than he had imagined. He felt a sense of foreboding wash over him, a deep instinct telling him that whatever was speaking to him was not of this world. "Get away from the pedestal," Simon shouted, his voice trembling. "It's protected by the Guardians, ancient sentinels that protect the crystal. They'll destroy anyone who tries to take it." John turned to Simon, fear flashing in his eyes. "What do we do?" But Simon didn't answer. He was staring at the pedestal with a mixture of awe and terror. The ground beneath them began to rumble again, and the low hum in the temple grew louder, vibrating in John's bones. Suddenly, the air was thick with energy, crackling like static electricity. The temple seemed to come alive, the stone walls glowing with the same eerie light that emanated from the crystal. And then, from the shadows, figures began to emerge, tall, cloaked beings, their faces hidden beneath hoods of shadow. They were silent and menacing, their presence filling the chamber with a sense of dread. John's heart raced. He had hoped the temple would offer refuge, but instead, it had become a trap. The Guardians of Zoritha had awakened, and they were not pleased to see intruders. The voices in the air grew louder, now speaking in unison. "You will not take the crystal. You will not leave this place." John's body tensed. He could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. The Guardians were ancient protectors, designed to defend the power of Zoritha. There was no way they could win this fight. He had to act fast, before it was too late. The Reckoning, a battle for survival. The chamber was now filled with an oppressive energy, as though the very air itself had turned hostile. The Guardians, cloaked in shadows, moved slowly toward John and Simon, their movements deliberate, like ancient creatures who had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Each step they took seemed to distort the space around them, bending the light and casting long, unsettling shadows that stretched across the walls. John's pulse quickened as he stepped back, instinctively positioning himself between the Guardians and Simon. He had to protect Simon. He had to protect Emily. The relic was their only chance, and there was no turning back now. The Guardians were relentless, and they would stop at nothing to keep them from the crystal. Simon's eyes darted from John to the Guardians, his face pale with fear. "We need to get out of here," he whispered urgently, his voice shaking. "We can't fight them. These aren't just regular enemies. They're protectors of the ancient technology. They'd been guarding this place for millennia." John's grip tightened on the weapon at his side, his mind racing. There had to be a way out. The Guardians were relentless, but they weren't invincible. They couldn't be. He had fought for too long, survived too much, to let this be the end. He wasn't going to die in this cursed temple. He wasn't going to let them take Emily's future. One of the Guardians stepped forward, its face hidden in shadow, its movements eerily silent. Its voice echoed through the chamber, deep and cold. "You will not leave here. You will not desecrate this sacred ground." John's breath caught in his throat. It was impossible to tell if the voice was coming from the figure itself or from the very walls of the temple. But it didn't matter. He wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not when he was so close. The air around them grew thick with energy, a crackling tension that felt like a thunderstorm was about to break. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the guardians seemed to grow larger, their forms becoming more menacing. John could see the faint glow of their eyes beneath their hoods, like two burning embers in the darkness. Simon's hand shot out, grabbing John's arm with a sense of urgency. "You need to understand something," Simon hissed. "The crystal doesn't just control this planet's power. It controls the destiny of every living being in the galaxy. If the wrong person activates it, it could shift the balance of power. It could destroy entire systems." John's mind spun with the realization. The stakes were higher than he'd ever imagined. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about the fate of the entire galaxy. And he wasn't going to let anyone, alien or human, control that power. The guardians closed in on them, and John's heart pounded louder in his chest. There was no more running, no more negotiating. The time had come to fight. "Stay close to me," John ordered Simon, his voice low but firm. He raised his weapon, preparing for whatever came next. "We can't fight them head-on, but we don't have to. We just need to buy time." Simon nodded, his face grim. "Just don't get yourself killed." The first guardian lunged forward, its hands outstretched, aiming to strike them down. John fired without hesitation, the energy pulse from his weapon hitting the guardian in the chest. The impact sent the figure stumbling back, but it didn't fall. Instead, the guardian's body absorbed the shot, its form shifting and reforming as if the blast had done nothing. "This isn't working," John shouted, frustration rising in his chest. He had to think fast. The guardians were too powerful, too ancient. The only hope they had was to use the temple to their advantage. The relic had to be the key. There had to be something in the structure itself that could stop them. The second guardian charged forward, its hand crackling with dark energy. It swung at John, but he was faster. He ducked beneath the blow, narrowly avoiding the deadly strike. The air around him vibrated with energy as the guardian's hand slammed into the stone floor, sending cracks spiraling outward. "Simon," John shouted as he rolled to his feet, "get to the pedestal. The relic has to be the key." Simon hesitated for a moment, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Are you crazy? They'll tear you apart before you can get near it." John's mind raced. He knew what he was asking Simon to do, but there was no other choice. If they didn't take control of the crystal, they wouldn't leave this temple alive. "Do it," John ordered, his voice filled with determination. "I'll hold them off." Without another word, Simon turned and sprinted toward the pedestal, his feet echoing through the chamber. John's heart pounded as he turned to face the guardians. They were closing in fast, their eerie glowing eyes fixed on him. He couldn't keep dodging forever. He had to make a stand. The first guardian lunged at him again, but this time, John was ready. He fired another shot, this one aimed directly at the guardian's head. The blast struck true, but instead of falling, the guardian's body began to twist and distort. The energy pulse seemed to have triggered something inside the creature, and for a brief moment, the guardian faltered, its form flickering. John's breath caught in his throat. This was his chance. "Simon," he yelled, his voice desperate. "Hurry." Simon reached the pedestal, his hands trembling as he placed the relic on the stone surface. As he did, the chamber seemed to come alive. The walls began to hum with energy, and the crystal at the center of the pedestal pulsed brighter, its light filling the room. The guardians stopped in their tracks, their eyes locked onto the glowing relic as if they too were drawn to its power. The entire temple began to tremble, the ground shaking beneath their feet. The guardians, once unstoppable, seemed to falter, their movements slowing as the crystal's energy overwhelmed them. John felt a surge of hope. The relic was working. But for how long? The guardians growled, their forms shifting, but they didn't attack. The power of the crystal had rendered them momentarily powerless. Simon looked at John, his eyes wide. Now what? John didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, grabbing Simon's arm and pulling him toward the exit. Now we leave. The temple was falling apart around them, the walls cracking, the ground shaking violently. As they sprinted for the door, John felt the weight of the moment crashing down on him. They had the relic, but they had also unleashed something powerful, something that could change the galaxy forever. But Emily was still out there, waiting for him, and no matter what it took, John wasn't going to stop until he found her. The final revelation. Power unleashed. The temple continued to tremble beneath their feet as John and Simon sprinted through the narrow corridors, the walls cracking and shifting with each passing second. The relic in Simon's grasp pulsed brighter and brighter, its energy overwhelming the chamber's ancient structures. The entire place seemed alive with raw power, as if the very heart of Zoritha had been awakened. "Move," John barked, his voice urgent. Every step felt like it could be their last. The ground beneath them cracked open, sending shockwaves through the corridor. The walls groaned in protest, and dust fell in clouds, blurring their vision. There was no time to waste. Simon stumbled ahead, his fingers white-knuckling the glowing relic. The dark whispers of the guardians faded as they ventured further into the heart of the temple, but John knew they weren't out of danger yet. This place was filled with traps designed to keep out the unworthy, to protect the relic at all costs. The worst, however, was yet to come. "Keep going," John shouted, pushing Simon ahead. "We need to get outside. Now." Simon didn't look back, his face set with determination. But John could see the fear in his eyes. The crystal was powerful, too powerful. But it was also dangerous. The more they held onto it, the more it felt like something was pulling at their very souls, dragging them closer to the edge of an abyss. They reached the exit just as the temple seemed to give one last violent shake. The entrance, once a solid stone door, crumbled under the pressure, giving way to a blinding light. John shielded his eyes as they emerged into the open air, but the sight that greeted them made his heart skip a beat. The sky above them had changed. The atmosphere around Zoritha was in chaos. The crystal, still in Simon's hands, was no longer just glowing. It was radiating beams of energy that reached into the heavens, distorting the sky. The once peaceful world had become a swirling vortex of energy, its pulse synchronized with the glowing crystal. "What the hell is happening?" Simon gasped, his voice a mix of awe and fear. John's eyes widened as he realized the magnitude of their discovery. The crystal wasn't just an ancient artifact. It was a weapon, one capable of altering the fabric of reality itself. The very balance of the galaxy was at stake, and they had just triggered something far bigger than they had ever anticipated. Before John could speak, the ground beneath their feet shifted once more, sending them tumbling to the dirt. A sudden roar filled the air, echoing from deep within the planet. The ground cracked open as massive, mechanical structures rose from the depths of Zoritha, war machines built for one purpose: destruction. "The Guardians," Simon whispered, his voice barely audible over the deafening roar of the awakening machines. "They were never meant to stop us. They were meant to protect us from this." John's heart sank. They had just unleashed an ancient war machine built to destroy anything that threatened Zoritha's power. And now, there was no way to stop it. From the horizon, a massive figure emerged, an enormous warship, seemingly made from the same ancient materials as the temple. It was a living weapon, a war machine beyond anything John had ever seen. Its massive guns turned toward them, glowing with deadly energy. John's eyes shot to Simon. "We can't outrun that. We have to stop it. Now." Simon's hands were trembling, his face pale. He knew they didn't have the firepower to defeat this kind of enemy. But the crystal in his hand pulsed with power, as though responding to the threat. It wasn't just a relic anymore. It was a key to something even more dangerous. "We have to get rid of the crystal. Simon said, his voice desperate. "If we don't, it will destroy everything. The ship will destroy everything." John looked at Simon and then at the war machine bearing down on them. The crystal was their only hope and their greatest threat. Without it, they stood no chance. But with it, the galaxy could be thrown into chaos. "Do it," John said firmly. "Destroy it." Simon hesitated, his fingers tightening around the crystal. I don't know how. The power, it's overwhelming." John looked around, trying to find any sign of salvation. But there was no way out. The ancient warship was getting closer, its weapons ready to fire. They were running out of time. Suddenly, a deep, resonating voice echoed across the field, one that sent a chill down John's spine. "You cannot destroy what was never meant to be destroyed." John turned, his heart skipping a beat as a towering figure emerged from the shadow of the warship. It was another guardian, one that dwarfed the others, its form massive and imposing, covered in ancient armor that glowed with the same eerie energy as the crystal. The guardian's eyes burned with an unnatural fire, and its voice carried a sense of finality. "You have awakened the power of Zoritha," the guardian intoned, its voice deep and foreboding. "And now you must face the consequences." The figure stepped forward, its hand raising toward the crystal in Simon's grasp. A surge of energy shot from its fingers, and the crystal reacted, pulsing with wild energy. It was as though the guardian was attempting to take control of it, to harness its power for itself. John's pulse raced. There was no way they could let this happen. The galaxy's fate was in their hands, and he couldn't let an ancient being take that control away. With a final burst of energy, John lunged at Simon, knocking him aside just as a blast of energy surged from the guardian's hand, striking the ground where Simon had been standing only moments before. The impact sent a shockwave through the air, sending both men flying. "Simon!" John shouted, struggling to get back to his feet. The energy from the blast had thrown him off balance, but he could still hear Simon's ragged breathing. He wasn't dead. Not yet. The guardian stepped forward again, its presence dominating the landscape, its eyes fixed on the crystal. John knew that this was the final battle, the one that would determine the fate of the galaxy. With one final, desperate effort, he pushed himself to his feet, drawing his weapon and aiming it directly at the guardian's glowing eyes. But before he could pull the trigger, the crystal in Simon's hands pulsed one final time, and the world seemed to freeze. A flash of white light filled the air, brighter than anything John had ever seen, and in that moment, time seemed to stand still. When the light faded, everything had changed. The war machine, the guardians, the ships, everything was gone. The sky above them was clear, and the air felt different, lighter somehow. Simon looked at John, his face filled with disbelief. "It's over. We did it." John stared at the horizon, where the war machines had once stood. The world was silent now, peaceful, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the galaxy had just been changed forever. "I hope we can live with what we've done," John muttered, his voice barely a whisper. And as the two men stood there, amid the ruins of the temple and the fallen guardians, they knew that the future would never be the same. The power they had unleashed had changed everything. And now, they would have to face the consequences.